A creepy old mansion up on a windswept moor, one wing mysteriously ravaged by fire. A lone surveyor sent by her company to assess if this building would be suitable to convert into a hotel. She meets the sinister housekeeper and the even more sinister gardener. Then she sees the locked door in the kitchen. What could go wrong? Well, today on Dragon's Teeth we're going to find out exactly what went wrong, because we are playing Lovecraftesque. Hi folks, thanks for joining me today. So you may remember that a little while back I received in the post a rather hefty box of a game called Lovecraftesque. I got this because we had Becky and Josh of Black Armada Games, the creators, in as guests on the Innsmouth Book Club podcast a while back. They were talking about the launch of the game at that time. It so intrigued me that I backed the Kickstart, and that lovely box arrived, and I did an unboxing of it, say a few months back now, and it has sat on the shelf ever since, much to my dismay, because you know how it is, there's so many games, there's so little time, there's so many things going on. However, last Monday I got the chance to take this down to Bedford Gladiators, and Rachel, Luke, Paul and Neil joined me, so we had 5 players. This is for 1 to 5 players. We had a full complement. Now, the first thing I'm going to say, I keep saying game, the Lovecraftesque game. It's a game of a sort, I suppose, but this isn't a game where you're moving little models around. You don't have characters as such. There's no statistics. There's no dice rolls even. In fact, this is more of a cooperative storytelling game. I'll explain how that works in a moment, where the whole group is involved in pushing the narrative forward. So if you think more like an investigation game, like me, some of you have maybe played the Sherlock Holmes games or Arkham Investigations, that kind of thing, where you have a case to solve. On the surface, it's that kind of game, but when we dig in a little more, it's actually quite different. What that means, for one thing, is in terms of filming, there's not much to look at. It's not a visual game. As you'll see here, we've got the small board that the cards go on in various configurations, and then everything else is verbal. Everything else is described and explained by the players themselves. So how does this work? Well, I think, as I mentioned before, when you play an investigation game, you normally do things like maybe you move around a board and you find clues, and the players might all write down what they think those clues are. Generally, everyone is playing as a separate person or separate investigator. With Lovecraftesque, there's just one character. There's one character, but there are 3 roles. So, first of all, we have the narrator. This is the person who describes the scene, describes the location, and describes the other characters. When you first set the game up, you have the choice of running through, I think there's 6 scenarios in the book, or you can develop your own scenarios with the cards as well. So basically, the narrator, the first person, starts by setting the scene. They'll have some location cards, they'll have some character cards, which are specific to that scenario, or not so much if you're making your own. So they start the game off by saying, in our case, we've got this strange mansion, we've got the person approaching, you read the description of the person, you embellish your own description of the location, and then the narrator plays a clue card. In the first part of the game, things are just starting. This is a game of gradually developing horror, very much in the weird fiction tradition. So the clues initially are little things are out of place. I decided I started as the narrator with the mansion. It looked like there was maybe a window missing, to give the impression perhaps there's a secret room somewhere. So it's something fairly subtle. The next player is the witness. So that player, in effect, is now the main character. They describe what the main character is thinking, what they're looking at, what are their actions going to be. The other 3 players take on the role of whisperers. At any time during this preceding narration, the whisperers can whisper or chirp up, add in any detail they might like, or perhaps put a few ideas in, and then the narrator can choose what they think is the best one. So they might say, oh, you notice this, or you notice that. You notice the gardener has a strange scar down the side of his face. They can start adding in all this detail. So with this, you get your quite basic descriptions from the cards, but then the whisperers, well, and the narrator as well, start adding in all these little layers of detail. So you think, well, that sounds like a kind of normal setup. We've got like a GM type person, we've got a character, and we've got a couple of voices off stage kind of thing, a couple of spare people. But here's the different thing. That's turn 1. Turn 2, now the roles switch. Now the person to the left of the narrator becomes the narrator, the next person round becomes the witness, and so on and so on. So that original narrator now becomes a whisperer. This was great because in effect what it means is everyone gets a turn at playing the main character, everyone gets a turn at being the narrator, everyone gets the chance to pitch in with their ideas. The only real rule about this is the narrator has to introduce a clue at some point during the turn. Now this could be at the start of the turn, it could be halfway through, it could be near the end. The other thing the narrator has control of, I think, this is how we played it anyway, was the narrator can introduce new locations and new characters. So the narrator might say, okay, we're going in the house now and we're going into the kitchen. So we've got a new location. Perhaps there's a card for that. Perhaps there's a new character we can introduce. In our case, it was the housekeeper, the sinister housekeeper. Oh, and as each turn ends, by the way, everyone gets to write down what are called conclusions. So you've got a little notepad and a pencil, and you just jot down your ideas about what you think might be happening here. Because as I mentioned in Act 1, which is called Signs and Portents, we start getting these little clues about something quite odd is happening. In this phase, by the way, there's no direct harm is allowed, so the character can't be attacked or damaged in any way. And everything that they see or happens to them could kind of be explained rationally, probably. So I thought this was really nice because this really builds up that idea that Lovecraft uses a lot, and M.R. James, of course, is a master of this, of everything seems normal apart from that one little thing. Now, once we've gone through 5 turns of that initial stage, things start ramping up as we head into Act 2, Impending Doom. So this means now we're still not really at the sort of time of physical harm for the character, but these happenings are going to get stranger and stranger, less easy to explain in normal, everyday, rational terms. This continues for another few turns, and then we move into Act 3, Journey into Darkness. So now the rules change again. We can have physical harm, we can have overtly supernatural or weird or cosmic things going on, strange creatures, teleportation, time travel. Anything you like is thrown in at this point. So this takes us into this spiral, and we have a set number of moves here again, but it changes a little now because the roles are forgotten and the cards are forgotten, and now everyone just takes it in turn to speak a little or a lot to move the plot along. So now we're just totally improvising in what we've had in the past and whatever sort of conclusion we might have in our own mind as to where this is going. This then, after a set amount of terms, leads us into the final horror, the big confrontation at the end, if you like, where everything is revealed, where the character may or may not survive intact in one form or another. And we finish with an epilogue and final thoughts. So the epilogue is that kind of bit at the end of the film, you know, when the horror has happened and the house has burnt down or whatever it is, and then we see someone else driving up in a car, you know, the next victim, that kind of thing. And the final thoughts or conclusions, well, the scenario is finished now, and we sort of chat for a little while about how we think it went, what could have gone different, the different endings we were all thinking of, and everything else. So what did we think of this then as a group? Well, I'm pleased to say that everyone enjoyed the game. I think at first maybe some of us are a little bit wary about, oh, I've got to make stuff up. So this was maybe one thought at first. You do get your clue cards, you've got your character cards and your locations, but they're fairly brief. You know, they've got some detail on them, but then it's up to you to flesh this situation or character out. So this does call for a certain amount of imagination and willingness to put yourself into the game, so to speak. One other point that came up with that was two of the players said, well, we don't really know much about the Cthulhu mythos. We're not really read a lot of Lovecraft, played some Call of Cthulhu, that kind of thing, but didn't feel they were perhaps not knowledgeable enough in order to be able to have input into the game. Well, to be honest, that's not a barrier at all, because certainly in the scenario we played through, there's no overt mention of mythos entities. You know, deep ones don't pop up. Spoiler alert. Well, they could if you wanted them to. There's no mention of Yog-Sothoth specifically. So it's not even necessary, I don't think, to be fully versed in the Lovecraft mythos to play this. In fact, I could see you running this as a great M.R. James type game. It certainly has that structure and feel as well, as much as it does for anything involving the Cthulhu mythos. And I think whatever misgivings there might have been at the start, they soon evaporated once we got into the game. Now, this was the first time I played it as well, so, you know, we're looking at the booklet every few minutes. By the way, the rule books and everything are all very nicely laid out. It's very easy to find things. And as I mentioned in the unboxing, the look of the game, the quality of the components really is first class. There's a lot of thought has gone into this, even down to the way the box is designed. The plastic tray in the box is designed to, when you get your expansions, you can just fit them into the plastic box inside the box as well. So a lot of thought has gone in, and the presentation is excellent. And that, of course, all helps. It helps keep people invested in the game if you've got these nice looking components. The other odd thing with this game, if I can, well, it's Lovecraftesque, it's got to be odd, right, is you get a UV torch. And apparently on the boxes and inside the booklets in the artwork at various times, if you shine the UV torch, there are certain things revealed. Now, one thing we didn't know, because there was no mention of this in a scenario as such, if this was something that was built into the scenarios, or is there a card that says shine your torch on page 5 or whatever. We didn't experience that, so we're not sure if that forms part of a scenario or if that's something you just do yourself at random just to find these hidden things. In terms of the mechanics though, it all ran smoothly. I think we were doing everything okay, but I need to look at maybe one of the longer playthroughs on YouTube just to check. The only thing I was a bit questioning about in my mind was, as a narrator, is it just the narrator who can introduce the new characters and locations? I think that's the case. That's how we played it anyway, and it seemed to work. But the nice thing with having a cooperative game is there's no argument about the rules. Not, to be honest, that there is generally anyway. It's very rare that you find any sort of, it says here that you can't do this. You might get a little bit of that in some of like conventional games, but generally in those type of games, any argument can be decided with a dice roll anyway, so it shouldn't be a big issue. There's a lot of effort put into how you set up the game initially, because the thing is, this is a horror game. Now, if you're playing with a group of people you know well, probably no issues. But even so, down at the club, we still had this little bit at the start to say, are there any subjects that people would rather did not come up in the game? If there are, you can just make a note of those, and none of the players then is going to raise that particular issue or action or whatever it is during the game. So you can easily set up some safeguards, because horror, it's like comedy, it's a personal thing. So what one person might think is quite tame to another person might be upsetting even. So it's good that they've put these mechanisms in place just so you can sort all that out before the game starts. Our game got pretty dark pretty quickly. We had the sinister housekeeper. We had the house owner, was a young man who'd inherited the house and wanted to get rid of it very quickly. There was some very nice descriptions of the study. in the house with odd taxidermy animals and some funny old books. We then moved into the kitchen where we had that locked door leading down into the cellar. We went out into the garden. Again, we had some great descriptions of winding paths, of a fountain with a very strange statue at the centre of it, some old caves that were explored a little bit, and so on. And basically, it all built up to the idea of there being a thing living in the cellar that thrived on human blood. Uh, I won't go into any more detail about that because, again, it did get very dark and it might be upsetting to some people. But suffice it to say that when the heroine went back into the kitchen, that previously locked door was temptingly ajar. Of course, she looked in, gets pushed down the steps into the cellar where the creature manifests itself. Now, it looked like she was going to escape at one point, thanks to some deft card play. However, the housekeeper had a different idea and shoved the heroine back down the cellar and locked the door. The end. Then, however, in the epilogue, we got what I thought was a masterstroke from Paul. So rather than the epilogue being someone else coming up to the house and that kind of thing, the epilogue was our same character, the same heroine, driving up to the house. In other words, we spooled back to the start, making this whole thing a very interesting sort of time loop. And it really did tie in with some deja vu experiences that had just so happened earlier on as well. So I thought this showed the strength of the game, that a couple of little things that can come up can be picked up on, and they might not be a major plot point, or they may be, but they can then be weaved into the narrative later on. So yeah, overall, as I say, everyone enjoyed it. Everyone thought it was something really different to play, and everyone is keen to play the next scenario, or well, a particular scenario, which is called Mr. Giggles Comes to Dinner. Yes. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to that or not. So it took us about 2 hours or so to complete that scenario. I think next time it will probably take us a little bit longer, as we'll know how to fill the story out a little bit more. I think once people have got experience in how the game runs and how it works, then they'll become fuller in their descriptions and plot narratives and everything else. So yeah, but it's a great game if you want to sit down without having to set a load of stuff up and try something really different. I could also see this being used to generate ideas for scenarios for Call of Cthulhu or similar games, maybe even to provoke story ideas if you're a writer. You know, there's a lot of great stuff in here. And again, for writers in particular, I think this is a great exercise in sort of refining and building your descriptive powers as well. And just finally, I would also add as well, so we have these 6 scenarios, but here's the thing. When you play a normal investigation game, you have a case and you go through and you make your conclusions at the end after studying all the clues, and then you check in the book or you open the envelope or whatever it is to see who the murderer was or what happened. Obviously, once you've done that once, that's it. You can't replay that. With this, because you're in control of the narrative, it's going to be different every time. So there's tremendous replay value in this as well. And that is just for those 6 scenarios. As I said, we'll play Mr. Giggles next time. But after that, then we'll also look at developing our own scenarios as well, for which there are extra cards. And I mentioned those expansion sets as well. We'll certainly be looking at those in the future. So if you're looking for something a little bit different in the weird fiction or horror field, you don't have to worry about setting a load of things up, terrain and figures and all the rest of it. Easy to play, straight out of the box, 2 or 3 hours. 5 people can play. Everyone gets to join in and contribute. They don't need to know anything about the Cthulhu mythos in particular. In fact, in some ways it's better because ignorance is bliss. Then I would highly recommend Lovecraftesque. I could also see this being a great game to play at conventions and the like as well. In fact, speaking of which, I'm going to see if we can get something set up for this for the Innsmouth Literary Festival coming up in September. There's going to be some other gaming going on, of course. I'm certainly going to be setting up my skirmish game, We Want the Gold. You'll be able to drop in and take part in the battle for Innsmouth, or for Innsmouth, depending which side you want to go on. But it would be nice if we could see if we can get some sessions of Lovecraftesque up and running as well. Perhaps on the day or perhaps on the Sunday. We're hoping to get some extra gaming time built into the event this year. Okay, there we go. That's it for today. Thanks again for joining me. If you've played Lovecraftesque, I'll be very interested to hear your experiences. Do you have any other similar investigative games that you recommend? I have to say, I think this is pretty unique for the reasons I've already mentioned. So this is something really rather different. And if you're into your Lovecraft or your weird fiction and your M.R. James, then I really would say take a look at this. As always, comments, questions, suggestions, always welcome. Just pop them down below or drop me an email. If you haven't already, please do click that subscribe button. It really does help the channel grow. And I'll see you next time. Oh, watch out for Mr. Giggles.